His legs were dead weight, a cruel, immovable reminder of a life violently interrupted. But as Sergeant Marcus Rile, a man who once commanded soldiers, clawed his way through the thick, sucking mud of the Blackwood riverbank, every inch was a universe of agony, a testament to a forge in fire. The only thing truly alive in that moment was a terrifying roar in his ears. The river, swollen and furious, the raging storm, an apocalypse unleashed, and above it all, the desperate, piercing screams of a little girl being swallowed by the torrent. He was a broken soldier, his body a prison. Yet here he was, fighting a war he logically shouldn't have been able to wage. And from the sidelines, amongst a crowd frozen in horror, Eleanor Vance, a woman cocooned in layers of wealth and icy detachment, watched this impossible sacrifice unfold. She had no idea that the hero emerging from the mud wasn't just fighting to save a child's life. He was about to show her, and perhaps himself, how to truly live again. And in doing so, she would offer him a future he had long since stopped daring to even dream of. Marcus Rile's mornings began not with the blare of an alarm, but with a silent, internal battle. The first challenge was consciousness itself, often arriving with a familiar ghost of phantom pain dancing in limbs that hadn't felt the ground in years. Then came the meticulous, exhausting process of transferring his uncooperative lower body from bed to the well-worn seat of his standard-issue wheelchair. Each movement was a carefully orchestrated maneuver, a testament to a discipline honed in the unforgiving deserts of forgotten war, now applied to the mundane realities of a life confined. His small apartment, kept with military neatness, was both his sanctuary and his cell. The faded photographs on his nightstand, a younger Marcus, uniformed and smiling, surrounded by his unit, were like relics from another man's existence. The eagles and unit crests tattooed up and down his powerful arms, once symbols of strength and belonging, now seemed to mock his immobility. They were stark, inked reminders of the man who could run for miles, who could carry a fallen brother, who could stand against any threat. Now, his primary battles were against stubborn door frames, inaccessible curbs, and the crushing weight of invisibility that often came with the chair. He'd spend hours some days just staring out the window, watching the world move at a pace he could no longer match. The laughter of children in the park across the street, the couple strolling hand in hand, they were beautiful and they were painful. Loneliness was a quiet, persistent hum beneath the surface of his days. He missed the camaraderie, the shared purpose. He missed feeling useful. He tried. He volunteered at the community center on Tuesdays, helping kids with their math homework. His gruff exterior would soften when a child's face lit up with understanding, a small spark in the prevailing grayness. But it wasn't the same. The medals, the commendations for valor, they were tucked away in a dusty box under his bed, much like the deeper parts of his own story, the parts that still ached with longing for what was and what could no longer be. Across town, in a sprawling stone mansion that seemed to gaze down upon the valley with an air of regal indifference, lived Eleanor Vance. Her world was one of hushed footsteps on antique rugs, of art meticulously curated to fill vast, silent rooms, and a staff who moved with an almost invisible efficiency. Her late husband, Richard, had built an empire, and then he had left. 2 years gone now, leaving behind a legacy of wealth and a silence in Eleanor's life that no amount of board meetings or charity galas could quite fill. She moved through her days with a polished, almost brittle composure. Her smile was often a perfectly applied accessory, her words carefully chosen, her emotions kept under a layer of Chanel and cool reserve. That particular Saturday, she'd allowed her persistent social secretary to dragoon her into attending a Riverside fundraiser for the City Beautification Project. She found such events tedious, a parade of superficial pleasantries. Standing apart from the main throng, her silver mink coat a soft armor against an unseasonable chill that mirrored the one in her soul, she observed the scene. Families laughing, children darting about like brightly colored birds. It all felt distant, like watching a play whose language she no longer understood. A faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaped her lips. When had her own life become so muted, so devoid of genuine feeling? The first hint of nature's impending fury was a sudden, capricious shift in the wind. It rustled the vibrant banners of the fundraiser, tugged at carefully coiffed hair, and sent paper napkins dancing across the manicured lawns like frantic white ghosts. The sky, only moments before cheerful, unassuming blue, began to bruise, darkening to an ominous, turbulent purple. A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. Then the rain, not a gentle summer shower, but a sudden violent deluge, as if the heavens themselves had ripped open. The Blackwood River, usually a placid, meandering ribbon of silver, began to visibly swell, its surface roiling, its color transforming into a murky, angry brown as it devoured its banks. Shouts of alarm, then panic, erupted. Among the scattering attendees were Sarah Miller and her 6-year-old daughter, Lily. Lily, a bright spark in a yellow raincoat, had been chasing her favorite red ball, which had skittered perilously close to the water's edge. Her laughter, pure and innocent, was abruptly choked off. One moment she was a vibrant splash of color against a grim, darkening landscape. The next a monstrous, unexpected wave, a vanguard of flash floods surging from upstream, snatched her. The red ball bobbed mockingly on the surface as Lily was dragged into the churning chaos. Sarah's scream was not just a sound. It was a raw, visceral tear in the fabric of the afternoon, a primal cry of maternal terror that sliced through the roar of the escalating storm and the rising tide of human panic. People rushed to the riverbank, pointing, shouting uselessly, their faces pale with horror. The river was now a raging, demonic beast, and Lily was a tiny, flailing doll being mercilessly swept downstream. Marcus, positioned under the partial shelter of a small, canvas-topped picnic awning a little distance away, had seen it all. His blood ran cold, then hot. His heart didn't just hammer. It exploded against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct, every cell in his body, honed by years of training to react decisively in moments of life or death crisis, screamed action. His eyes, sharp and assessing, scanned the panicked faces on the riverbank. They were frozen, a tableau of horrified helplessness. He knew that collective paralysis. He'd seen it on the battlefield. He also knew, with chilling certainty, that hesitation was a killer. "Rope," he bellowed, his old sergeant's voice, rusty from disuse but still imbued with an undeniable authority, cutting through the cacophony. "Does anyone have a rope? Anything strong?" His gaze locked onto Lily, her small face a pale, terrified blur in tumultuous, debris-strewn water. She was already too far out for an easy reach. There was no time. He couldn't wait for someone else to find their courage. With a guttural grunt of exertion, a sound that seemed to tear from the very depths of his soul, Marcus launched himself from his wheelchair. The chair, his metal confidant and cruel captor, crashed onto its side, landing with hollow thud in the rapidly deepening mud, a useless, discarded shell. He hit the muddy ground hard, the impact jarring through his spine, sending daggers of fire up his back. But he barely registered the physical shock. All that existed, all that mattered, was a child, her desperate cries a siren song pulling him forward. His arms, thick with the corded muscle forged in years of relentless service and maintained through grueling, solitary daily workouts, became his legs. He began to crawl, to drag his unresponsive lower body through the slick, cold, grasping mud. Each movement was an agonizing, monumental effort, a testament to a will that refused to be extinguished. The cold rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead, mingling with the beads of sweat that already poured down his face, stinging his eyes. His teeth were gritted, bared in a snarl of ferocious determination. The intricate army tattoos on his biceps seemed to writhe and flex with the strain of his almost superhuman effort. He was a primal force, a father's protective instinct warring with a body's betrayal. Someone, a stunned-looking teenager with wide, frightened eyes, finally processed his desperate plea and thrust a coil of bright orange nylon rope towards him. Marcus snatched it, his fingers, surprisingly agile despite the cold and the desperate urgency, fumbling for a secure grip. Eleanor Vance watched, utterly transfixed, her breath caught in her throat. The chaotic scene unfolding before her was like a vivid, terrifying fresco of human desperation. Yet it was sickeningly real. The raw, brutal, almost savage effort of the man in the mud. It was elemental, primal. Her expensive, impractical suede heels were sinking into the mire, the hem of her designer dress already soaked and stained. Her silver mink coat, a symbol of her status and her insulation from the harsher realities of life, suddenly felt like a suffocating, absurd weight. She saw the overturned wheelchair, stark and abandoned, and in that instant, she understood, with a clarity that pierced through her carefully constructed defenses, the true magnitude of the sacrifice being made with every excruciating heave of the shoulders. The man's face, contorted into a mask of profound pain and ferocious, unyielding resolve, was briefly, starkly illuminated by a sudden, jagged fork of lightning that tore the bruised sky in two. It was followed by a deafening, rolling crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground beneath her feet. It was a heroic, terrible, beautiful tableau. All her cultivated poise, her years of practiced attachment, crumbled like ancient stone. This wasn't an abstract problem to be discussed in a boardroom, or solved with a carefully worded press release and a generous donation. This was life and death, stripped bare, playing out in the most visceral, gut-wrenching way imaginable. A hot, unfamiliar wave of shame pricked at her, sharp and deeply unwelcome, as the realization struck. She and everyone else on that riverbank with two good legs had stood by, paralyzed by indecision, while this broken soldier, this man already so grievously wounded by life, threw himself into the breach. His grunts of effort, his tortured breathing, were audible even over the relentless roar of the storm. He was a force of nature himself, battling the raging elements, battling his own broken body, battling for a life that was not his own. Marcus reached the treacherous, eroding edge of the river, the cold, angry water surging around his chest, trying to claw him into its depths. The current was unbelievably strong, a malevolent, invisible hand trying to tear the precious rope from his grasp. He quickly, expertly, looped one end of the rope securely around his wrist, the nylon biting cruelly into his skin, a small pain in the symphony of agony that was his body. "Lily!" he roared again, his voice strained, raw, but somehow carrying over the maelstrom. "Lily, can you hear me? Grab the rope. Grab it, sweetheart." The little girl was further out now, her small head bobbing precariously, her tiny hands flailing in a desperate, weakening ballet. She was tiring fast. Hypothermia would be setting in. Her mother, Sarah, was now waist-deep in the raging water herself, held back from certain doom by two other women, her face a mass of utter, soul-shattering anguish, her own screams lost in the wind. Marcus knew he couldn't just throw the rope blindly. The savage cur would snatch it away in an instant. He had to get closer, or guide it with an almost impossible precision. He began to inch himself further into the treacherous, swirling water, the slick mud giving way to a rocky, unstable riverbed beneath his dragging legs. The numbing cold was seeping into his bones, a deadly chill, but the adrenaline coursing through his veins was a raging fire, a furnace of pure will. He fought the relentless current, using submerged rocks for momentary, precarious leverage, his arms, shoulders, and back screaming in protest with every movement. Finally, with a desperate, explosive surge of effort and a prayer born of pure hope, he managed to whip the rope out in a wide arc. It landed miraculously, within inches of Lily's outstretched hand. Her small, numb fingers fumbled, slipped, then, with a tiny, desperate gasp, closed around it. "Hold on," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. "Hold on tight, Lily. I've got you. Don't let go." Then began the even harder part, the agonizing, seemingly impossible pull. It was Marcus, one disabled man, against the full, untamed fury of the Blackwood River. Each desperate tug on the rope sent excruciating jolts of agony through his already screaming shoulders, his overtaxed back, his raw, bleeding hands. The slick, treacherous mud offered little purchase as he tried to drag himself, and the dead weight of the waterlogged child, back toward the relative safety of the bank. He could feel his immense strength waning, the icy water systematically sapping his energy, his core temperature plummeting. He gritted his teeth harder, tasting the metallic tang of blood where he'd bitten through his lower lip. Fragmented memories flashed unbidden through his mind, not of the heat of battle this time, but the cold, sterile rooms of his physical therapy, of the endless, frustrating, soul-destroying hours spent trying to coax even a flicker of life back into his unresponsive legs, the therapist constantly urging him to dig deep, find more. He dug now, deeper than he'd ever imagined possible, into reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed. On the riverbank, a subtle but significant change had occurred. Galvanized, perhaps shamed into action by Marcus's incredible, solitary display of raw courage, a few of the stronger-looking men had finally shaken off their paralysis. They began to form a clumsy human chain, tentatively reaching out from the bank. Eleanor, her face streaked with rain and mud, her earlier aloofness completely shattered and forgotten, was there, right at the edge, her voice, surprisingly strong and clear, cutting through the storm. "He needs help. We need to help him. Get closer to him. Form a better line," she urged, pointing, directing, her manicured hands now gesturing with an uncharacteristic urgency. She had shed her priceless fur coat at some point, tossing it heedlessly onto the muddy ground, its luxurious cream lining now irrevocably stained and ruined. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered in that moment but that heroic man in the water and that terrified child. Slowly, agonizingly, yard by precious yard, they gained ground. Marcus, fueled by a primal, ferocious need to protect, pulled with a strength that seemed to defy his physical limitations. The men on the bank, now working with more coordinated, albeit desperate, effort, managed to get a better collective hold on a rope further up, taking some of the immense strain off Marcus's failing arms. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of brutal effort, Lily was close enough. One of the men, braver than the rest, waded precariously into the shallows and snatched her from the water's deadly embrace. A collective gasp, a sigh of profound, almost unbearable relief, swept through the drenched and shaken onlookers. It was a sound so potent it was almost a physical force. Sarah, Lily's mother, collapsed on the muddy bank, sobbing hysterically, clutching her shivering, wide-eyed, terrified daughter to her chest. Marcus, his monumental task accomplished, finally let go of the rope. His arms gave out completely, utterly spent. He slumped forward, his face pressed into the cold, wet, unyielding mud, his entire body trembling violently with a combination of profound exhaustion and the biting, relentless cold. He could hear the distant, mournful wail of sirens, growing steadily closer. Vaguely, as if from a great distance, he was aware of hands on him, gently, carefully trying to turn him over, voices murmuring words of concern and awe. He felt himself being lifted, surprisingly gently, onto a firm stretcher, the blessed relief of a warm, dry blanket being draped over his shaking frame. Lily was safe. That was all that mattered. The rest was just noise. As the paramedics worked efficiently around him, checking his vitals, gently cutting away his soaked shirt, try to warm his dangerously chill core, a figure approached through the throng of emergency personnel and gawking onlookers. It was Eleanor Vance. Her usually immaculate blonde hair was plastered to her head in sodden clumps. Her expensive silk dress was hopelessly mud-stained and torn at the hem, but her eyes, when they met Marcus's, held an expression he had never encountered before, a complex, powerful mixture of profound awe, deep, soul-stirring respect, and something that looked startlingly like a heartfelt apology. She knelt beside the stretcher, heedless of the thick mud that caked her knees, staining her ruined dress further. "Sergeant," she began, her voice a little unsteady, softer now than when she had been directing the rescue efforts. "My name is Eleanor Vance. What you did today, I have never witnessed anything like it in my entire life." Marcus, still dazed, his mind struggling to surface from the depths of exhaustion and cold, managed only a weak, almost imperceptible nod. He half expected a polite, slightly awkward thank you, perhaps a brief handshake, if he could summon the strength to lift his arm. He was used to being an object of fleeting pity, or sometimes a moment of quickly forgotten admiration. He certainly wasn't prepared for what came next. "Your wheelchair," Eleanor said, her gaze flicking toward the overturned, battered chair lying forlornly in the mud nearby, a poignant symbol of his daily battle. It's clearly inadequate for a man of your caliber. For a hero." Marcus frowned slightly, a flicker of confusion in his tired eyes. He wasn't sure where this was going. He was too exhausted to feel defensive about his chair. It was simply a fact of his life, a constant, frustrating, and deeply unglamorous companion. "My late husband, Richard," Eleanor continued, her voice softening further, a hint of old sorrow and new understanding mingling in her tone, he served. "A long time ago, in Vietnam, he came home. Well, he came home changed, of course, as all of you do." She paused, a flicker of shared experience in her eyes. "But he always said that the military, for all its horrors, taught him the true meaning of strength. Not just physical strength, but the strength of character, of spirit, of unwavering commitment to the person next to you." A faint glimmer of understanding began to penetrate Marcus's weary consciousness. This wasn't just a wealthy woman making a polite, if slightly unusual, observation. There was a deeper current here, an unexpected connection, a shared understanding of a world and a sacrifice that most civilians never truly touched, let alone comprehended. "I run the Vance Foundation," Eleanor said, her voice gaining a new firmness, a resonant clarity that spoke of sudden, decisive purpose. "We support various philanthropic causes, but we have always had a significant arm dedicated to assisting veterans, particularly those with service-related injuries. For years, it's been, well, professionally managed. Efficient, certainly. Important, of course. But perhaps," she hesitated, searching for the right word, "perhaps lacking a certain personal fire, a direct connection to the heart of the matter." She looked directly at Marcus then, and he saw a bright, determined spark ignite in her eyes, a focused intensity that had been entirely absent when he'd first noticed her at the fundraiser. "Watching you today, Sergeant Rile, what you did in that river, you reminded me, you showed all of us what that fire looks like. You demonstrated more courage, more grit, more sheer, unadulterated will in those few minutes than many people manage to show in an entire lifetime." Tears, hot and unexpected, welled in Marcus's eyes, blurring his vision of her earnest face. It wasn't just her words, though they were powerful enough. It was a genuine, unvarnished emotion behind them, the raw respect that radiated from her. It had been so long, so very long, since anyone had truly seen him, seen past the chair, past the disability, to the soldier, the man, still very much alive within. Eleanor reached out, hesitantly at first, as if unsure of the protocol for touching a hero, then place a hand gently, firmly, on his arm, her fingers resting over one of his faded eagle tattoos. "This is not just a thank you, Sergeant. This is an offer. My foundation will, of course, cover any and all medical expenses you incurred today, any treatment you require, anything at all. That is the very least we can do." Marcus was stunned into silence, his mind reeling, struggling to process the sheer magnitude of her words. It felt unreal, like a dream induced by exhaustion and hypothermia. But that's not nearly enough. Eleanor pressed on, a new, vibrant energy infusing her voice, her posture. "We will provide you with a new, state-of-the-art, all-terrain wheelchair, custom-fitted to your exact needs, whatever you require to give you the maximum mobility and independence you so clearly deserve. And we will fund any further physical therapy, the best available, anywhere in the country, for as long as you need it or desire it." Marcus could only stare at her, his mouth slightly agape, his thoughts a whirlwind. This was beyond generosity. This was life-altering. But even that, Eleanor continued, her eyes shining now with an almost missionary zeal, even that is not all. "I saw your command out there today, Sergeant. Even in that hell, you were leading. You were making decisions, taking charge when everyone else was lost. We need someone like you at the Vance Foundation. Someone with your experience, your heart, your indomitable spirit. I want to offer you a position, Sergeant Rile, a real one, a senior role, advising us, guiding us, working directly with us to truly help other veterans, to help us understand their real needs, to reach them where they are, to make a genuine, tangible difference in their lives. You wouldn't be a recipient of our charity, Marcus. You would be a leader. You would have purpose again." A choked sob, raw and undisguised, escaped Marcus's lips. Purpose. The word echoed in the hollows of his weary mind, a balm to a wound he hadn't realized was still so open. It was the one thing he'd craved more than anything else, perhaps even more than walking again. He thought of the endless, sterile VA appointments, the soul-crushing bureaucracy, the pervasive, unspoken feeling of being forgotten, of being a burden. And now, this woman, this complete stranger who had, only an hour or so ago, seemed to belong to an entirely different, untouchable planet, was offering him not just assistance, but a chance to be part of something meaningful again, to use his experiences, his pain, his resilience for good. Just then, Sarah, Lily's mother, approached, her face pale but etched with profound, tearful gratitude. Lily, wrapped snugly in a thick paramedic's blanket, her small face scrubbed clean by a kind EMT, clung tightly to her mother's side. Tears still streamed down Sarah's face as she looked from Marcus to Eleanor and back again. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed emotion. "You saved her. You both did in your own ways." Lily, her earlier terror now replaced by a child's innocent, unwavering awe, reached out a tiny, still slightly trembling hand and gently touched Marcus's mud-caked arm. "Thank you, soldier man," she said, her voice small but clear as a bell. Marcus felt a warm spread through his chest, a profound, healing sensation that had nothing to do with the blankets piled on him. It was hope. It was connection. It was a dawn after a long, dark night. He looked at Eleanor, truly looked at her, and saw not a wealthy benefactor condescending from on high, but a fellow human being who had been profoundly moved, whose own life had found an unexpected, new direction on that chaotic, muddy riverbank. He managed a small, tremulous, but genuine smile. "Yes," he rasped, his voice hoarse and weak but firm. "Yes, Mrs. Vance, I would like that very much." The weeks and months that followed were a period of profound and sweeping transformation for Marcus Rile. The new wheelchair, a gleaming marvel of lightweight alloy and advanced engineering, was more than just a mobility device. It was a key, unlocking parts of the world and parts of himself that had been closed off for years. It moved with an ease and responsiveness that felt like an extension of his own will, allowing him a freedom and independence he hadn't experienced since before the bomb. The advanced physical therapy, conducted at a specialist center funded by the Vance Foundation, was grueling, pushing him to his limits and beyond. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt a flicker of sensation, a whispered response, in muscles long dormant, a tiny spark of possibility, where before there had been only numb resignation. Yet, the most significant change was internal. His work with the Vance Foundation wasn't just a job. It quickly became a calling, a mission. He threw himself into it with the same fierce dedication and unwavering focus he'd shown on that storm-battered riverbank. His first-hand insights as a combat veteran with life-altering injuries proved invaluable. He met with other wounded warriors, listening to their stories with empathy born of shared experience, cutting through red tape, fighting for their benefits, and helping to design programs that offered not just financial aid, but dignity, respect, and a tangible path forward. The persistent shadows of depression and isolation that had clung to him for so long began to recede, replaced by a quiet, steady confidence, a renewed sense of self-worth, and the unmistakable glow of purpose. Eleanor Vance, too, was a changed woman. The cool, polished attachment that had once been her shield was gone, replaced by a vibrant, passionate engagement with her foundation's work, particularly its newly revitalized veterans initiatives. She discovered a fire within herself she hadn't known existed, or perhaps had allowed to smolder for too long. She and Marcus formed an unlikely but remarkably effective partnership, built on a bedrock of mutual respect, shared vision, and surprising, easy camaraderie. She often remarked, with a smile that now reached her eyes, that Sergeant Marcus Rile hadn't just saved a child that fateful day. He'd saved a vital part of her, too, reigniting a sense of meaning and connection she thought had been lost forever with Richard. The story of the paralyzed vet who crawled through mud and raging waters to save a drowning child became something of a local legend, a quiet but powerful reminder that heroes don't always wear capes or carry weapons, and that sometimes the greatest acts of courage, the most profound displays of human spirit, come from the most unexpected places, from those who have already given so much. Little Lily Miller, now thriving, would often send Marcus hand-drawn pictures, usually of a stick figure in a wheelchair with a superhero cape, battling a very scribbled river. Marcus kept every single one. His life was no longer measured by what he had lost, but by what he could give. He was no longer a spectator, watching the world from the sidelines. He was back in the fight. Not a war of bullets and bombs, but a daily battle for hope, for dignity, for the quiet, resilient strength of every soul who had sacrificed and struggled. And this time, Marcus Rile knew, with a certainty that warmed him to his core, he was truly winning.